You are a man that loves Canada.
Yeah, man. I'm a patriot. I mean, that's the thing. I am. You don't put out 44 Canadian records of different bands from across country in weird places and not love what's happening here.
Hey, this is Adam Sewell, and this is the Dynamite podcast number 004. This episode features an interview with Paul Lawton from Mammoth Cave Recording Company, who have recently decided to close down, shut their doors. And this is sadly another Canadian independent record label closing down due to the realities of financial restrictions and troubles in 2015. Paul, as some of you may know, is one of the most outspoken and polarizing figures in the current Canadian music industry. He is the man behind the Slagging Off blog, as well as the somewhat notorious The Trouble with Factor blog from 2013, I think it was. That was a blog that really helped to sort of put Paul in the national spotlight and also really helped to sort of table some pretty serious conversations with regards to all sorts of grants and funding for record labels and artists and on a national level. And whatever people may think one way or the other, I'm someone who happens to think that it was a conversation that was long overdue. Now, for the purpose of this podcast, I really just wanted to talk to Paul about Mammoth Cave Recording Company, what the record label had done, and the reasons that they decided to call it a day. I'm not someone who feels as though I'm well versed in the ins and the outs of the grants and funding issues. I sort of seem to operate myself in a bit of a bubble and a bit of a vacuum and don't really have much to do with that world. So I didn't really want to raise those issues with Paul. In the description of the podcast, we should hopefully have some links that'll be there where you can check out some interviews that Paul's done where he's been incredibly articulate and discuss those topics in depth. Now, I will say this, whether Paul is talking about Mammoth Cave, the recording company, the bands that he's played in over the years, or grants, etc., which he does bring up from time to time during this interview, he is incredibly passionate, and he shows himself to be somebody who really, really, really does truly care about seeing Canadian artists be able to release Canadian records. Now, originally, I thought that we'd sit down, for maybe an hour or so and just talk about things. And truthfully, I'd never met Paul in person before doing this interview. But Paul turned out to be just such an incredibly nice, friendly guy. And the conversation ended up being well over 2 hours. So it's taken a lot to edit the full interview down to, I think this is just over an hour long now. And I hope you can get a real sense as to, the fact that he is not the curmudgeon or troll that some people would like to pass him off as being. He's a really, really articulate guy, really, really cool, very friendly, and we had a great time talking, so I hope you enjoy this. Now, I'd also like to send out a special thank you to Stu and Kim over at Playdead for letting us use the Playdead store at 1696 Queen Street West to record the podcast. If you have not been to the new Playdead location, I highly recommend checking it out. It's just an absolutely beautiful store full of incredible artwork and lots of custom pieces that Stu's been working on. And also, Kim set up a very, very nice hair salon in there. So it's an art studio / hair salon. 2015, gotta love it. So anyway, so here we go. This is the Dynamite podcast number 004 with Paul Lawton from Mammoth Cave Recording Company. So you're originally from Lethbridge, or you?
So I had a weird child. I was born in Moose Jaw.
Okay.
And then I moved. So kindergarten to grade 12. I went to 12 different schools in different cities. My parents moved all the time.
And this is all out west, though?
Everywhere between Winnipeg and Nanaimo.
Wow.
And everywhere north. I was as far north as Lac La Ronge, Saskatchewan, which is like, I went to a school where I lived in a town where we were the only white family. It was all like First Nations.
Oh, that's great.
And
or maybe it wasn't so great. I don't know.
It wasn't great for me at the time because they were like, those kids hated me. Like, it was like, who is this kid? So it was like perpetual outsider, and then I just near the end of high school, we were in Winnipeg, and then my family moved to Alberta and Lethbridge, and I just kind of at that time decided that you can't, it's as good a place as any. That geography didn't matter. Everything is always kind of the same, no matter where you're at.
And what year would that have been?
Like mid-90s.
Okay.
And then I just stayed there, and I moved to Calgary a bunch of times, and then here, 2012, just like had enough.
Now, why did you end up coming to Toronto?
Fast Forward magazine, which just closed today, was their last
really?
issue. Yeah. In 2011, I was on the cover of Fast Forward 3 times, and I thought, I've peaked. There's only so much I can do here, right? It's time for a new challenge. Ketamines at the time was blowing up. We had like buzz and a big U.S. booking agent, and I was like, we got to try this, and we could do this in Alberta. Every time we played in Alberta, it was like packed and maxed out, and then like, well, we got to start expanding our horizons. So I moved here and
decided to take it on.
Yeah, exactly.
But was it just you from the band that came out?
Yeah. So that band was me and a guy who is basically he's an ex-heroin addict. He's a shut-in. So he and I were writing the music together, and the records were only the two of us. And I always had a revolving live band.
Okay.
So then I just basically started in Toronto again with a new backing band, all from people I knew from Calgary, the Calgary scene, which was funny. But
nice.
Yeah. So it was like just familiar faces.
Toronto's sort of. I grew up right downtown here.
Okay. Yeah.
In Spadina and Bloor.
Okay. Yeah.
And it's been strange seeing Toronto over the last maybe 20 years.
Yeah.
Has very much become like New York.
Right.
Where it is now officially the place to come to.
Sure.
And sort of start up, and it's very strange seeing all of the people that I grew up with have all left Toronto.
Totally. Yeah.
All of my friends from school have all left, and sort of the scenes seem to be made up of people who've come here in their early 20s.
Yeah.
Come here for Sneaky D's and your first tattoo. And,
sure, yeah.
I
mean, all of my friends that I hang out with here now are all ex-Western patriots. And it's like this own weird micro scene within Toronto of all just like, we get along. Our scene is the Western kids and the Maritimers. It's like Ontario, like people from Toronto don't really get what we're doing. The people from Halifax who live here definitely do. The people from Moncton definitely do.
What do you think the connection is?
I think it goes back to this like perpetual outsiderness and this feeling that you come like every morning.
Is it sort of you versus the big
I think so.
city?
Yeah, I think so. That it's a bit much. When I lived in Lansdowne in Queen when I first moved here, it was culture shock for me. I've been here a lot on tour, and I moved here because I wanted to be close to. I didn't know anything about the hoods in Toronto, and I was like, I just want to be close to Parts and Labor because that's where we always played. So we're like, oh, I'm gonna find an apartment and I can walk to Parts and Labor, and I went once, and I was, I was like, yeah, okay, no, there's just too much, and I was too poor at the time, and it was like, I can't afford to do anything here because everything is fucking expensive.
Right.
Like I owned a house in Alberta that had 4 bedrooms and a huge backyard. And the money that I got from that, I couldn't even get into a starter condo here. It is brutal. So I guess let's sort of bring this around to sort of current events. Sure. Yeah.
So you've moved to Toronto.
Yep.
You're here.
Yep.
You've been now. How long had Mammoth Cave Records existed before you came to Toronto?
Since 2008. So it was about 5 years or 4 years before I moved to Toronto.
Okay.
4.5, and then We had last year was our 7th year, so I guess I had it going here for about 2.5, 3 years. So, but half of its life almost was here.
Okay.
Half of it was Alberta.
And so you've decided now, though.
Yeah.
That's it.
Is this recording right now?
Yeah.
Oh, the whole time.
Yeah.
Shit. Sorry.
That's okay. Surprise.
I just ruined that.
So, but we get to 2015.
Yeah.
And Mammoth Cave being it's a vinyl only label. Am I correct on this?
Well, our first release was a cassette.
Okay.
In 2008, which at the time there weren't a lot of people doing tapes,
right?
And I decided to just try it because we'd had this dream of some of my friends and I who were all like heavily invested in touring and playing shows in Western Canada and stuff. There's all these great bands that were happening in the area. Calgary had this band called the Ostrich. In Edmonton, there was this great band, I think still one of the best, probably my favorite Edmonton band of all time, called the Wicked Awesomes. And then we had this band called Endangered Ape, which had 3 guitar players, and it was just like...
It's the best name for a band.
Endangered Ape, yeah, it was
great.
It was a great band, too. And I mean, it was my band, so maybe... But that was the first time that I'd really focused on my own music, and we built this massive system. We had 3 guitars, synth, guitar, or bass, and drums, and lead vocalist, who's like do the kind of like take your shirt off and get in the crowd, and just hardcore style. Right. And it was kind of like Black Flag meets I don't know, like any of the kind of the modern garage, like Oblivion style garage rock, and we were just like, okay, there's all these bands kind of coming and going that nobody is documenting, and so we decided that we were just gonna, fix that problem ourselves, because what was happening in Alberta, especially at the time, is you'd have Vancouver bands and they had their labels that they could get on, like Mint or Network, or there was like a path up for bands there.
Sure.
There were small labels like Hockey Dad and Nominal at the time and stuff, and then out in Ontario, obviously this is like record label central. Every second person has a record label here, and and we knew of the labels in the things that were happening in the Maritimes and stuff, but in Alberta there's just like really no one doing it except for maybe Flemish Eye, who was doing like Chad Van Galen and Women and things like that. And so we decided that we were just gonna start by putting out these bands. So we did this first. It was a tape, it was a compilation called Alberta Boom that had 6 bands, 3 from Lethbridge, 3 from Calgary, and 3 from Edmonton. And then after that, we started touring a lot more, and one of my bands, I was in a band called the Mylan Sheaths. I was a drummer, and we got an offer out of the blue. We put on 3 songs on MySpace, and this label from Chicago, Hozak Records, who I had been a personal fan. I have every Hozak release. It's one of my favorite labels. And we were definitely going for that kind of sound, and they offered to do a record for us. And then we started, I think something clicked, because we were from Lethbridge and people pretty much people from Calgary ignored us, let alone Toronto or anywhere else, and we'd sent stuff around, but nothing really happened. And then all of a sudden there's interest from Hozak, and then Hozak called, which led to other labels trying to like snap up all the Lethbridge bands. And it became this like micro in the garage world, our little corner, which had about 6 bands shared by about 8 people. Right. All started getting labeled, like Bachelor Records out of Germany did a record for the Mylan Sheaths, and this other great band called the Moby Dicks that I played in for a while did a record on Southpaw in Oakland, and just like the garage world was paying attention to our corner. So we were like, well, there's no reason why we can't capitalize on that. Right. So we did I think we had 3 CDRs, an Endangered Ape, Mylan Sheaths, and Moby Dick's CDR. And then it was like, well, let's just take advantage of this. Hozak started signing up all these Calgary bands like Sharp Ends, which now Danny Christ from Sharp Ends has that band Viet Cong that everybody is going nuts over. Right. And so that was our first release, was us doing Sharp Ends, because Hozak was going to do a Sharp End single, so we could do a Sharp End single and kind of like ride the coattails of the fact that that was a way bigger label, and why not, kind of, and then from there, and that record did really well for us, so we just kept building it and started out almost all Alberta bands. But by release number 10, we started a thing called Bloodstains Across, which ripping off the old like Bloodstains Across the Midwest or whatever, and doing it for current Canadian bands. We did Alberta, and then we did one for BC, which had like White Lung and Beelines, like all our Shearing Pinks, like all the great kind of at the time Vancouver punk bands. We did Ontario, which had like unreleased Shadowy Men track, and Young Gov't and Tonetta, and just like crazy, Steve Atomic and White Wires, all these bands that we started kind of like expanding our scope. At what point we kind of decided to shift it away from focusing on Alberta bands and focusing it on kind of hinterland bands from places that nobody really cared about, which is a terrible business model, P.S., because it's like, we did a band, we put out records from bands in like Moncton and Sudbury and Guelph, and expecting that our fan base that we had built up over the course of doing these records, and especially the Shadowy Man reissue, it'd be enough to kind of give exposure to, in my mind, the best punk band in Canada right now, and maybe in the last 10 years, this band from Sudbury, Strange Attractor, who, every band in Canada has played with one of those guys' other bands over the years, and has slept in the Huel brothers' house, and like all these things. It was like, they have this band that is so good. Like, we were flipping our lids when we first heard the first LP. So anyways, it just grew and grew, but in a completely unsustainable way. With
what I was wondering though is the way that you guys were releasing records. Was it that you just wanted sort of to do the vinyl releases, and leave sort of CD and digital options to the bands, or?
I kind of always like been a vinyl. Like I always bought records. I was involved in hardcore in the late 90s, and all of our bands had 7 inches and stuff, and I just I never really went away from it. I never really. At one point, I started buying CDs when I could buy them used and they were cheap, and whatever. But to me, that was like really just, as soon as I got an iPod, I didn't care about CDs anymore, because it just didn't seem like it mattered anymore. And I always just wanted records. So for me, it seemed like a more permanent form of record keeping. So it had nothing to do with like the fetish object of record collecting or whatever. It had more to do with, to me, this seemed like a more timeless way to preserve and document things that were happening.
So the definitive format,
in my mind, absolutely. Because as the power goes out, there you can still find. If we were to like lose electricity, there would be ways we could figure out how to play records, but all of our digital files would be gone forever, right? Maybe that's a terrible analogy, but you know what I mean. I and there's something to me too about, this the kind of the bullshit around it. Like, it sounds better and all this stuff. It's just, I had always gravitated to it as a preferable way, because I think I have like attention deficit disorder tendencies, especially with music. If I have a CD, it's just skip, skip, skip. You know what I mean? And if I'm listening to a record on a turntable, I'm way less likely to get up and change a thing, and I'm more likely to enjoy a thing as a collective, as like a work of magnitude or scale. You're listening to this thing as it should be heard.
the 10 songs sequenced as it's meant to be.
Sure, there's a beginning, middle, and end to it. You have, and if done well, it takes you somewhere.
Right.
And that was always where we wanted to put out those kinds of records, and so there was that, and then there was the kind of like more, I think, political angle on our end, which is, or maybe the kind of like temperamental child thing where it's like all these bands that should be documented are not being documented, and someone has to do that because I think lack of knowledge of how it works and how to do it, because there is a learning curve to putting out records and distributing them and making those connections. It's just like we had no one to tell us how to do it. We had to learn the hard way every step of the way. Here's how you lose a ton of money. You send out a bunch of records in the mail for consignment and see you later. You'll never see that money again. You can write emails and say, hey, we were wondering about that $4 to you guys for that 7-inch you took consignment 2 years ago. And like, what are you talking about?
Right.
So anyways. So that was it. It was just a way for us to preserve and document and have things that we could love and share, and
Do you think, though, if you had expanded beyond the vinyl format and had done limited runs of CDs or done digital, do you think that would have really helped?
We toyed with it. We did, there are certainly releases that we did where there was small cassette runs and small CD runs, and I mean, we were there for a while. We were really vigilant about, we put out an LP, you have to make the CD version so you can get campus radio involved. And then we were like, oh, we can chart a record on Earshot, but that has no effect on sales.
I was going to ask you,
yeah,
have you ever seen record charting relate to record sales?
No, not. It's such a hard thing to measure, I guess, because in the long run, I think, it's short-sighted to say no, it has no effect, because it does create awareness, especially if you're number one, and there are people who do pay attention to it, but you're really kind of talking to the very small category of people who are, the campus radio DJ, who's probably getting his fill of your music for free, listening to it on his radio show. He doesn't need to buy it. What? That's, and that works in terms of us, maybe getting people out to shows more. And I think in that way it helped. But for us, it was like, we just dropped $3,000 on this pressing, and then, it's another $600 to get it CD version into campus radio. And then you're like, for what? Do you know what I mean?
I always found it just feels like there's this sort of campus radio black hole.
Sure. Yeah.
And you sort of fire off, whether it's CDs or it's LPs or whatever it is,
yeah,
into this black hole.
Yeah.
And it's just such a crapshoot as to whether or not and it's an expensive crapshoot.
Totally, yeah.
As to whether there's any, return on your investment of any kind.
Yeah, and if you think about it in that raw business sense, it's hard to justify. One of the original players in the Lethbridge scene was this Martine Menard, who was involved in the campus station in Lethbridge. She was in Mile and Sheaths, and then later Ketamines. We toured together a ton. She has a new band now called Hagface, who are great. They're Calgary witch punks. It's amazing. But she was involved in the National Organization of Radio, and what ended up happening with having that connection is that we ended up getting a lot of love from campus radio because of Martine. So she introduced us to, and so
it's always amazing when there's that one person
absolutely
that can really go to bat.
She can make it happen.
Yeah.
So we would send her the thing, and she would send it out from, and the radio station in Lethbridge had a thing where, at the very least, they would pay postage for if you wanted to send to campus, the radio station, for local releases, and she was instrumental in that, in terms of us being like a label that people knew about the campus radio is part of that story, for sure. But in terms of it helping us sell records, maybe. I think the only time that anything outside of my own like pushing in terms of building an email list and marketing and stuff that ever helped outside of that was when we had a Ketamines record that was reviewed on Pitchfork randomly. And that was the only time that we saw a direct, like, went on Pitchfork, the next day we sold 100 copies. So it was like, I don't know. It's hard,
But that's I think that goes a long way to prove a point, which is the right kind of media with real eyeballs.
Sure.
Can really help all kinds of bands.
Absolutely.
And bands that are out of the traditional inner circle.
Right.
So one review selling 100 records. That's a really powerful statement. I mean,
totally.
That's an amazing thing.
Well, it got us that. It got us our booking agent. We were booking with Panache Booking, who we had the Annie Southworth, who books like OCs and Ty Segall and all these, like, in our mind, bands that we were trying to get it. We were trying to live in that world a little bit, and it helped for sure. It enabled us to tour and do a lot of things we wouldn't have been able to otherwise. So it all is related for sure. But then this is the thing we were talking about today, because we have, I'm in a band now, and we're looking at developing a list of mail physical copies of our record that's coming out. And I went through my list that I made, I think in 2008, right around when we started, of who we used to mail physical copies of, like promo copies to.
Sure.
And I cut it in half. Half those people are not doing it anymore. And those are people I could rely on. I send them a record, they're going to give me a review, and it's going to, work in. And I think when you have a bunch of different people from different kinds of scenes writing about you, it helps. It helps you get your name out, and it helps sell records. And I think it's a thankless job. You get, if you are a music writer now, it's so easy for people to just fire emails at you. You're just like under barrage. I mean, I used to have a blog that was where I only wrote about a 45. Like, it was a 7-inch blog, and near the end of it, I had to just turn that email address off, because you're just getting, you write about music? It's just like stuff that is unrelated, because everybody is desperate. Everybody's feeling the same pressure.
You know what? I gotta be honest with you. I don't really feel much sympathy. Like, I don't feel empathy towards that situation, because it's, if you are a manager or you have a record label, as you know, you're up against exactly the same thing.
Totally.
You deal with exactly that same situation.
Yeah.
So you know what it is to have to say, look, I can ignore these 20 emails. This one I'll say, hey, look, best of luck to you.
That's right. Yeah.
We can't do anything with you now. And then there's a couple things you look at. But if you want to be a music writer, or you want to be an investigative journalist, or you want to, do anything within the media, so what? How could you possibly complain that people want to feed you information and feed you free product all day long? And the toughest decision that you have to make is, I have to find the stuff in here that I actually like.
No, you're not wrong. For me, we had a thing on our blog that was, you send me a record, I'll review it. So send it in the mail.
That's the wrong way to be. I can't get behind that.
Versus like just sending me promo copies, right, or like digital files, which is where we went near the end of Mammoth Cave was, we're just going to send out digital promo because we can't afford to do anything else, because it costs me $15 to mail this LP to Pennsylvania, wherever the hell these bloggers are, and. You're not wrong. You're definitely not wrong. But the problem is that if I have, if I'm a music writer or whatever, just a person living in the music economy, like, environment, and there is an issue where there are more streams than you can ever possibly.
Oh, it's fucking white noise.
You can't do it, right? And so. I was reading an article, I don't know if you know, Aubrey Jacks from BlogTO wrote a thing about how to approach me as a music writer.
Sure.
Here's what you do, you know, because that's kind of information I think that will be helpful for a lot of people. But she lays it out pretty in an interesting manner. She calls it content fatigue. It's just like, you're just, you know, I'm online and I'm trying to write about the stuff I like and find new things, and I'm trying to give everybody a fair shake. But at a certain point, there's sometimes a lack of respect. Like, I write about this genre and this genre, and you're sending me, you know, jazz SoundClouds or whatever else and all of this stuff. It's like,
look, no, I get that, and I totally understand that. But I think that there's, you know, there are the woe is me music writers. I can't,
You're right.
I can't believe
Right.
somebody would send me a jazz release when they know I only write about indie rock. You know, come on, give me a fucking break.
But-
skip the email, delete the email.
You're right.
What did that take?
Yeah.
1 second. It took you longer to tweet about the jazz email that you got than it took you to actually just delete the jazz email.
I did a thing for a music festival, which shall remain nameless because they're still very active and they know me, and there's a potential that they would be listening to this. But I took for a while, as the guy who ran a label in Alberta, I would be included in vetting submissions to play this giant festival out west. And so we used to sit in my old studio with all the studio monitors set up, and I'd bring my friends over, and we would rate kind of between a scale of 1 to 5, and anybody with a 4 or 5 gets extra consideration. 3 under, you're done. You know, 3 is like, you're okay, or whatever. And we got to the point where, so we opened this thing up with, it was, I don't know why my words are escaping. You know, the Sonic bids.
Okay, yeah.
So it was a Sonic bid submission form. There's 1,200 submissions. There's 60 spots. Okay. And so you're like, okay, well, we got to get, should be easy, because you look through the list and you go, okay, this band's getting in, this band's getting in, for sure this band's getting in. It's based on your knowledge of who's doing what, taste, what kind of music that festival is doing. But you have to, because you're getting money from all the bands to submit, you have to show you've listened to every band for at least 1 minute. You've given them a fair shake.
Sure.
So, I mean, that really privileges bands who are immediate and upbeat and poppy, because you go, oh, this is great, yeah. Or, what is this? And we got to the point where we're running through these 1,200 things just for days. Just, and you could almost set a stopwatch to how long it would take you to say no. And on average, we were rejecting bands in under 3 seconds. You could just tell aesthetically, no.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's just like, this is not going to fly for this festival, or you know, like a little banjo coming. No, it's, you know, it's just like, in these signifiers that come and go so quickly that it's impossible for you to really like. I mean, and so with that knowledge from a label perspective and working with festivals and promoting my own shows and touring and everything else, you get this really warped sense of, and one of the reasons for me moving to Toronto in the first place was, this world is crazy. Like, it seems impossible, and every time you get to a certain level, you look around and you go, oh, there's just that much more to climb, right? And the higher you get, the more you're aware of how little anybody cares about any of it. And we as music people are just like, oh, this is how it is. And here I am, like, constantly talking about the problems with funding and the ways in which, certain music journalists kind of have these weird little empires that you have to somehow find your way into. And I still haven't figured that out either. Like, so there's this guy, we know he writes about garage rock records and he works at Pitchfork. He's reviewed this and this recently. How the hell did anybody get him to answer the email? Do you know what I mean? Like, what was the subject line? How many words before, you know what I mean? It's like you're pulling it apart in this way that's just sick. And it's just nothing to do.
There's no right answer. It could have been he was pouring milk into his coffee and just happened to look at the email in just the right way, and
that's it. It's impossible though. And then there's other people that will write about everything you send them. And sometimes you're like, that's a horrible review or whatever. Like, I really wish that person had spent more time listening to this.
You know what I thought was really strange was there were people that, from the label side, I would be chasing after these people in the media for years.
Sure.
To get them, like I'd send them emails and emails and phone calls, and you just, because that they're the right person ultimately. And you're just hoping, come on, at some point, it's going to happen. Never seems to happen. The strange thing I found was, you hit these people up once on Twitter, and boom,
that's it.
For some reason, Twitter is the great grand leveler.
I totally agree.
It's the strangest thing that these people who are so inaccessible, are accessible on Twitter.
It was like that Giangomeshi thing that came out near the end when everything's coming out, and they were like talking about how the whole thing unraveled because of Twitter, because he was obsessed with checking his app mentions. And when I had that Slagging Off blog, there was one joke I made about him saying that it was like I said the Canadian music industry is like the human centipede. Giangomeshi is at the mouth, and good thing he's got an appetite, because there's a lot of mouths to feed. And he responded within 5 minutes of that going up. Who are you? Why are you saying this to me? And I was like, this is a sickness, because for him, you live or die on this dopamine rush of people replying you on Twitter and saying really nice things or horrible things that just set you off. And
here's an amazing thing: one of the highest paid people, in the history, I think, of the CBC radio.
Yes, absolutely.
And yet, one bad thing said on Twitter. And he comes down off the mountain to address it directly.
I mean, I had a thing 2 days ago on the CBC Radio 3 blog. They wrote a thing about RIP Mammoth Cave. And I'm like, oh, this is news to me that anybody at CBC gives a shit about Mammoth Cave. But, okay. And they reviewed our favorite 10 releases. I'm like, oh, your favorite 10 releases. This is great. This is clickbait. They know that Exclaim and National Post and Chart Attack are all getting hits from this, so they better do the story too. And there's this thing about our indie labels are in trouble, this big clickbaity thing, and it's just, and in the comments, Grant Lawrence is talking about me and saying it's karma, the Mammoth Cave stopped because I made fun of him one time on Twitter again, and he's carried around with this around with him for like 2 years, and then I responded to that. I was like, Grant, like, man, I'm so sorry. It was like I was taking a comedy writing class at the time. I was trying to be funny. I'm sorry that I hurt your feelings. But in 1995, I went to a Smuggler show and you were a dick to me. And I carried that around the whole time. And I used to listen to Radio Sonic and shit. Right. And I used to be like, fuck this guy. I hate Grant Lawrence. And I didn't. It's just ridiculous.
Right.
Who hates Grant Lawrence? How could you care enough to hate anybody? It's more of a joke than anything. It's just like, I hate Ben Mulrooney. Like, who gives a fuck? Like, it doesn't matter.
I mean, I really hope, and I mean, because the thing is, getting ready to sit down with you and do this.
Yeah.
I went and I'm looking through sort of, Mammoth Cave history online, or what you can find.
Yeah.
And you guys just killed the website.
We did. We had to.
I mean, the website's gone. The Facebook page is gone.
Yes.
There's a couple things that are still up there that are sort of...
Well, there's a reason for it.
Okay.
I pulled the website down. So we did a fire sale. We said, everything must go. LPs are $5. Singles are $2. Whatever. Just get this shit out of my house. I have to move again in a month or two, and I needed... I think a psychic cleansing of these records that just started amassing, because it's just like, we're going to do a 500 run of this, and then I'm going to sell 80 copies of it, and I'm just going to carry these other ones with me from house to house, and it's just like enough already, right? And what happened is we made the announcement, and it got national press, which is like, where have you all, where have you been?
Sorry. That was the point I was going to make, which is, I would hope that the takeaway from this, and that some of the Canadian media learns, that you shouldn't be taking these active labels for granted like this.
Sure.
You shouldn't be waiting until they close their doors before you're doing a top 10 on them.
Why is CBC Radio 3 all of a sudden, other than clicks, because that's how they measure their worth. It's like they're going to get clicks from this story. They know that I have a specific kind of following on social media and from the blog and other stuff.
Look, I just hope 1 week we can go without the top 10 Sloan haircuts of the 90s and maybe more features like the top 10 Mammoth releases.
Yeah. So we pulled the site down. What had ended up happening was our site broke. So many people came to, and I wasn't expecting. I sold more records in the last week than I did in the last 3 years combined. At rock bottom.
It's collectible vinyl.
Now it's like, I gotta have everything. And so what had happened is records that I had very low quantity of sold simultaneously, and then it just broke our inventory. So I'm at work one day, and I'm at work the day that I announced it. This stuff happens. I'm in meetings all day, and I come back, and it's like, you have 200 orders. And they've all bought the same record. So I send a thing out. It's like, it's impossible for me to process everything and get people's records out in a reasonable thing. So I sent an email out to our mailing list, and I said, look, our inventory system broke. If I have a lot of records here. So if you are not happy with substitutions, then let me know now and we'll refund you and you can start over and figure out what we have and whatever. Right. But if you are, great, because we have a lot of great records to get rid of. And so if you like that, we'll try to match, if this is out of stock, well, you're going to like this. So, and then what ended up happening is people start getting their records and they're like, what the hell is this? And I'd be like, I sent you an email on Saturday and we sent the records on Sunday. You had 2 days to kind of respond here. I'm not, these were fire sale prices. This is not whatever. And I'm starting to get all these messages, and I just had, I have to be done with it for, they're offline. They're not gone. I just had to pull them down so that I could get let things clear out, and then we'll figure out after the smoke clears what's the damage.
Well, let me ask you this: if things had gone a little bit differently, would Mammoth Cave still be going, or would it have to have been drastically different?
Look, it's a good question because there's a part of me that's like, I'm never going to be done with any of this stuff. Mammoth Cave is done. I've toyed now that I have capital again. The first thing as I looked at my PayPal thing, I'm like, man, I got like $2,000 in here after. Yeah, it's like that's enough for another LP. Let's get let's
not
put
the way
record.
to be thinking about it.
But then I'm like, I mean, it got too big for us to handle. Like, we did that Shadowy Man reissue and handled that. I don't think that could have gone worse. That was the beginning.
Can I ask you, how did you end up getting Shadowy Man release?
Evan, who did the label with me, he's in Calgary, so he plays in the band Fist City, and he was in the early Lethbridge scene with us. He and Fist City came to Toronto to record at Don Pyle's studio.
Okay.
And we had approached them to do for a song on our Bloodstains Ontario comp. And when they gave us this great old punk rager with vocals and everything, it's an incredible song. My first time I moved in the prairies from Moose Jaw to Brandon as a kid, and we got cable for the first time in my life, and we had much music. And one of the very first videos I saw was Shadowy Countdown. Sure. Scared the shit out of me as a kid. It's like these terrifying puppets. I'm like, what the hell is this? Like, I couldn't sleep that night because I kept thinking about this weird song, and I'd never heard music like this. I've been a huge Shadowy Man fan my whole life. And we just asked if we could do it, not really thinking about, we spent way too much. We did gatefold, 180 gram, beautiful printed inner sleeves, the whole nine. That pressing cost us so much. And then that was the first time that we ran into pressing plant delays, where what had happened is we were pressing at Rainbow independently. I wasn't with a broker at that point or anything, and we're like, man, this is taking a long time. Usually, like, we'd have test pressings by now, and it's been like 10 weeks. And at the time, I was on tour with Ketamines and doing stuff, and I was trying to keep on top of it. And also then in the middle of that, I'm going to move to Toronto, right? So this whole thing kind of starts cascading, and the records were legitimately delayed by Rainbow because that's when the Beatles took over. They bought out Rainbow for 2 months and just pressed reissue after reissue after reissue. And so we missed 3 different Shadowy Man reunion shows with Dallas from the Sadies playing bass. 1 sold out show at Lee's, 1 sold out show, 2 sold out shows in Calgary, 1 at the Legion, which holds like 2,500 people. And the idea was, let's do the reunion so we can sell the records and everything will be fine. I missed the Lee's Palace show with those records coming on a truck to Toronto by 1 day.
You know the rule, though. I mean, you have to know the rule, which is you never book the show until you actually have the LPs in-house.
And at that point, we thought we were fine because we thought we had a 1 month window. We're like, for sure, it's only ever taken us this long. And then it took us, for the Calgary, and then so the Calgary was in June, and the one here was in late July. And we didn't get the records till end of July, and it was done. Like, so they had played 5. Shadowy Man played 5 shows in Toronto, Cameron House and all these other places, and I just didn't have records with me. And
I'm so sorry. I know that pain.
And at the time, nobody had experienced that kind of delay. So it was them and another band, and to their credit, Shadowy Man were always very good with us, but you could tell they were frustrated because they're like, they're doing this these reunion shows. It's a big deal. It's supposed to be the reissue, and then the truth is I couldn't give them away after that point. We had our distro took about 100 of them, and that was it. We sent 100 down to our distro in the States. I think they still have 75 copies of it, and it was like, we loved that record, and there are people here that love it, but because we didn't have the money for proper marketing, the distro suffered and everything else. People just didn't know that it was out there against us trying everything. And to me, that was like the kind of the beginning of the end for me, because we lost we're like 10 grand we lost on that record. And everybody, when they found out, oh, you have that, and it would constantly sell 1 or 2 copies a month, but it was just never enough. It was like you're trickling them out.
Right.
We'd never be able to recoup it, and we missed the reunion shows, and the guys in the band aren't stoked with us anymore. And I mean, when I talk about getting rid of our records at a fire sale, it's like this emotional cleansing, because I've been carrying around that pain of that. Like, when you have something that fails on that level, it's this thing that you just own. And every time I look at my my label stuff, my expedit just exploding with our records, and every time I would look at that 2 rows of just solid Shadowy Man, I just you just go to bed just feeling like
I know
a big failure, you know what I mean? And it's like, I wanted to do right by them, and they wanted us to do digital stuff, and we just didn't. Like, I didn't have the capacity at the time. I think I was so disappointed with the way that everything was working, and I just kind of for a while I gave up. And we put out other records, but there's a certain emotional strength you have to do this stuff. And there was times where we had it back. We had a run last 2013, early 2014, where we did that Strange Attractor record from Sudbury. We did a band from Calgary called Telodrome, which those 2 records I think are the best 2 things we did back to back. A great artwork, amazing forward-thinking bands doing. They're not just doing genre work. They're taking Telodrome is doing this Gary Newman meets Ministry meets power pop, and then you have Strange Attractor, who are these lifer punk dudes that are writing these incredibly dark songs that aren't Satan is real. Like, it's just like, I eat too much bad food and I'm a fucking failure. And these kinds of things that are like, and it's not done with any sense of irony or anything else, or nor is it super generic and, dismissible. It's like these guys just like, everything they have left went into this record. And they did, both those records did really well. And then we did Simply Saucer, Bulletproof Nothing 45. I went to see in a theater on the East End, The Last Pogo Jumps Again documentary. Sat in that room for 3 hours. Blew my mind. And at the end of that, there is a great scene, like a montage, where they play Bulletproof Nothing. And I could just feel like, oh my God, this song. And I just got home from that at like 3 a.m. I was hanging out with my friend Jesse, who plays in bands with me. He was the editor at Weird Canada.
Okay.
And he is now writing a book on Simply Saucer. It's almost finished. That we were gonna help him put that out, as well as Mammoth Cave Books or whatever. And it was just like, do you think they would let me do a single? Like, because that Bulletproof Nothing should have been a single, right? It's so good, and nothing else they did sounded like it.
Right.
And it's like, this is a song that people should have in their DJ bin. You just want to throw on Bulletproof Nothing, and it's just treat me like dirt.
So your last 3 releases, then you're going out on a real high.
Well, no, because then we did those, so we're on a high, and then I did a Strange Attractor EP single that I sold 15 copies of. I did a band from Guelph called Start Something, who sound kind of like Husker Du. Amazing band, but again, didn't sell. And then we put in production in, I believe it was like late April, early May 2014, 2 LPs, one from a Ottawa power pop band called Mother's Children, and another from another kind of downer punk band from Moncton called Feral Trash. We put those into production in May, and we got them in mid to late November, and that was like,
what?
Yeah, that's what we're dealing with now. When I say pressing, like, my first thing on that, why we can't be a label anymore, is in part because pressing plants are just crazy backed up. And I was going through a broker that helped me move things fast. Some guy reached out to me on Twitter today and said, basically, like, he's been 5 months now, he's doing it independently, and he was 5 months without a test pressing even. So it's like, it's gotten
insane.
bad. I mean, that's because of Record Store Day,
right?
And the vinyl resurgence, Urban Outfitters, and all this other shit that just like squeezes you out.
Isn't that the vinyls?
The vinyls resurgence? Yeah, exactly. It's like, Mumford and Sons needs 50,000 copies of this on vinyl stat. And I know guys that work in record stores, and they're like, yeah, that's what sells. Like, we'll sell Jack White records, and we'll sell Taylor Swift pressings, but anything independent, see ya. You got to have the Beyonce on limited gold vinyl.
And they're not listening to it. That the shit's just going home, and
they're actually thumbtacking the record right on the wall as a piece of art.
There was a very smart man who once said to me, a friend who works at a record store, who once said, and this was years ago too, this goes back quite a ways, where, look, the majority of people who are buying vinyl or vinyls, they're not buying a medium for the music.
Right.
It's a 12-inch collector's piece of art.
Yeah.
And that's all that it is.
Right.
And
I think if you don't capitalize, I mean, the new head editor of Pitchfork is this music journalist Jessica Hopper. So the best news for Pitchfork, I think. If you're going to be the cultural institution of that magnitude, you got to have someone like Jessica Hopper at the wheel, because she is one of my all-time favorite modern music writers.
Okay.
She had a zine called Rookie, and she's written for everybody, and it's just, her writing is incredible, and her taste is incredible. She championed my band Mylan Sheaths early on, and we were all very, it did a lot for us, right? And I remember a tweet from her a couple of years back. It's like, I'm not buying new bands on vinyl. I'm buying the stuff that I know I love, that I want to have copies of, Velvet Underground and Nico and, Sticky Fingers and stuff. That stuff that I'm going to actually, stuff you want to listen to because it's like, that's why I have a turntable. I'm reading this article yesterday that went kind of viral from Wired that was all about these guys that source early stamper editions of classic records and sell them for like $1,500 a pop. They have this crazy sound room. They all listen and they all grade on how hot the pressing is because I guess after the early in the pressing it sounds better than the more the stampers use. It gets worse and worse.
Well, you're only supposed to play a stamper 3 times.
That's right. Yeah. So then you're doing countless records on it, and the further away you get from the first pressing, the worse it sounds. So these guys' job is they have this process of cleaning the vinyl and just like, and that whole world just doesn't interest me in any capacity. So, and I think the mandate for our label was always forward thinking, even and looking for forward thinkers in places where you're in a band from a small town and you're doing something different. It's way different than anything else anybody else in that town is doing. Everybody else is doing cover bands. You're doing this thing. It's like, this is something. And then you get in Toronto, there's this like group think, and you get this, people who have, they're holding the keys to the funding and everything else, and it allows entry into this other world as long as you play by very certain rules. And you get this stagnant. It's like it was a critique I was making when I was doing the reviewer cycle, when I was reviewing all those bands for Canadian Music Week. That initially that whole blog went viral because people were like, "This guy's an asshole," and I was going band by alphabetical through the Canadian Music Week thing, and it was all about, none of these, anything past 2004 doesn't exist for any of these bands. It's like what was happening between 94 and 2004. It's just now it's that move forward 10 years.
Sure.
It's like, the last innovative kind of indie rock bands that you can name. It's like, how could we do that? And then you have this weird, it's being kind of constantly backed up by, the major Canadian music press who are just like constantly, rewarding that behavior of, not moving forward but being accessible to this crowd, and it's just.
I find it breaks my heart, honestly. Look, and I should say, the people at Much Music.
Sure.
I've had great relations with a handful of people that have been there, and they've been very supportive of bands that I've been in and projects that I've worked on. And it's been great. But, I turned on Much Loud the other day.
Yeah.
And it was like watching 10 videos by awful bands.
Yeah.
Who really didn't have an original thought between them.
Sure.
And looked like they'd all been styled by the exact same stylists to look like a quote-unquote professional rock band making a professional rock video.
That's right.
But that was it. That was the extent of what they had to offer. And that to me was heartbreaking.
Yeah.
But then the 11th video comes on and it was something worthwhile. And so you're like, okay, so I'm still here.
But that's the way Much Music was always like that.
No.
You used to be able, for me, I would watch and I would be like, oh, you're waiting for your bands to get on.
I would say this. There was a time with Much Music, and the debate is I wish it was like it was before.
Sure.
It can't even have it. It's not a valid debate anymore.
Yeah.
YouTube has killed.
Yeah. Why would you don't need to wait?
You don't need to wait.
Which has weirdly ruined it. In a way.
It has and it hasn't. I mean, you can weigh the merits, but I think as far as Much Music, more so than any other video network anywhere in the world, was so progressive.
Sure.
And was so supportive and was willing to take chances. And when I was young, City TV would show videos every Friday and Saturday night. So that was the original City Limits.
Right.
And that was where you saw the Specials.
Right.
That was where you saw the Clash.
Right.
That was where you would see, homemade underground videos, because
Sure.
they could play them because there wasn't a glut of videos to play.
Yeah.
And later on, that's where the Shadowy Men
Sure.
video would come from, and
That's right.
things like that would be in
Yeah.
regular rotation.
Yeah.
And that was the norm, and
That's
that was
right.
great to see this really diverse, palette of artists and videos and all different styles and everything. But there was definitely a point in the mid-'90s where all of a sudden there was a mandate of very professional only videos, and
Yeah,
everything
absolutely.
starts to look the same. And
one time in 2009, one of our this band Fist City from our scene, they did a crudely drawn animated video, and it got on the first episode of The Wedge when Damien took
Sure,
over.
okay.
And it was the first time. And think about this, because this is the exact opposite of what you're saying. This is the first time a band from Lethbridge, Alberta was ever played on Much Music. Ever. In 2009. Way
crazy.
late.
That's good.
It's the first
But-
time. I had 40 people in my basement. Like, all watching it at the same time, and like,
Hey guys.
getting involved, and like, we're all sitting there like, oh, it came on, and it was like, oh, we did
That's
it.
amazing.
You know what I mean? And it was this feeling of, because that world wasn't open to us ever.
But that's the experience I'm talking about, and it really was great when they brought back City Limits, and to have
Sure.
Damien
Yeah.
go in there and do that. And I
Sure.
think that was the mandate, was to infuse some of that original
Sure.
City Limits and Wedge. Sorry, the Wedge.
The Wedge, yeah,
the Wedge.
yeah.
Type vibe back to what had become primarily a commercial pop station at the time.
Right.
It was great to see some credibility
Sure,
come
absolutely.
back. But at the same time, that was at exactly the same time when all of a sudden all that stuff was popping up on YouTube anyways.
Exactly.
So if you wanted to see these things, you could just...
So we did.
Find them
We
online.
ripped that. Because someone taped it, and then ripped the tape of that and put it on YouTube, because it was like the band with the Much Music logo.
Right.
We all passed it around like, oh, check this out. They were actually on Much Music, like, and for
It's crazy how those are the moments that fuel you.
It is, absolutely. But that was like, it was validation. We'd been working really hard, and we all thought this was just the beginning. Like, we're about to break something, and then it's like you realize there's nothing left to break.
That's
really,
it. Like, that's it.
That's it. There's nothing left to break. You can try, you can tour, you can put out records, you can have a great live show, you can do all this stuff, and it just doesn't matter. So, yeah. I don't know if anyone's going to listen to me ramble on about this stuff for more than 10 minutes.
Well, look, I mean, here's the thing. It was more important to talk to you about Mammoth Cave,
Sure.
and I wanted to ask you this.
Uh-huh.
By and large,
Yeah.
you've become known as that guy who wrote that blog,
Yes. Yeah.
The Trouble with Factor.
Sure. Yeah, yeah.
I don't really want to get into a full discussion about the grant thing.
Sure, yeah.
Because to be honest with you, I don't feel like I personally have any points to bring to the table. And
Sure.
I think you have been so incredibly articulate
Right.
over even the last couple of days, where it's come up with people that you've been talking to online. and
Sure,
some
yeah.
interviews. There's the
Yeah.
blog TO
Absolutely.
post, which I thought was great, and you did a great job.
Thank you.
Going through
Yeah.
that. But I really was curious: are you comfortable now being that guy and being known as that guy?
I think the bigger question is, for the people that are in my world, are they comfortable with it? Because I'm totally comfortable with it. I mean, look, like I came from a...
Because there are people who would love to ask you why you hate Canada.
Oh yeah, and I would say that it's the opposite. They have it backwards. I love Canada. I love Canadian music. I toured almost exclusively in Canada. I have pissed in both oceans on one tour more times than I can count. I've played in northern Saskatchewan and northern Alberta in the winter, because I feel like that there is valid experiences to be had there. And as a musician, if you're only sticking to this golden triangle, then you are missing out on the incredible support that you can find in Winnipeg and Saskatoon. Saskatoon right now being at one point in recent history, one of the best music scenes in Canada. And for me, all of that stuff came out of love. And I mean that. And it was never meant to put anybody, it was never meant as a call out to anybody specifically. It was meant to call out a system that I think is incredibly broken. Period. There's not much more to be said about it than that. There's a ways that you can nuance it. You can do this, you can do that. So am I comfortable with it? Yeah, I'm not comfortable that I know there's a lot of people out there that agree with me, and more than not, more people are like, you totally nail this. Like, you're articulate. This is it. You're right. I'm not an asshole. I'm normally very generous and kind. I get that rep a lot. Blog Teo calls me a curmudgeon all the time. I don't know why. It's a constant source of frustration for me that, like, there was a point where, even though they said otherwise, I was blacklisted from being written about in Exclaim, for example. Exclaim, the one constant from coast to coast in Canada, that getting in print in Exclaim means you get in Prince George and Lethbridge and Brandon and all these other places. And all these outsiders are constantly having to read about all these exciting Toronto bands, right? So there's years where this built up in me, where part of my reason for coming to Toronto was as like an alien coming to Earth to try to figure out why people acted this way. And I found out really quickly, and I didn't like it at all. I think that that the punks in this scene, quote unquote, and I'm saying this very broadly, so excuse me, because I understand that Toronto has 100 different punk scenes, so it's not. But it's just like, shut up, dude. Don't stop, because everybody's worried that if I say it loud enough that Stephen Harper's going to notice and take it all away from everybody. And I'm going to ruin it for everyone. All these people are be able to pay condo fees off of grant money. And if you keep talking about it, you're going to fuck it up for all of us. And frankly, I care that much about it, the future of the Canadian music industry being less insular, less Toronto-centric, less, you know what I mean? And more expansive and more, like, it's a Canadian music funding system should be there for Canada, and most of the country is completely left out from it. So if I'm the only one that has the courage to say something about it, because I'm not scared of being left out. I feel like I'm in the twilight of my music years. So what do I fucking care?
See, I get the feeling that I don't think I'm wrong when I say this, but to me it just really comes across that you're not anti-funding.
Oh yeah,
no. But you just would like to see things fixed.
I'm not anti-funding. I'm anti the way that the funding is being handled right now. When you set up the new system that, and I'm sorry that I know this isn't what we wanted to talk about,
sure,
but I can't help it. It's like you now have quantifiable level 1, 2, and 3. Level 1 is everybody. Level 2 is the bands that they're giving a shot to, and level 3 is your metrics and your broken social scenes or whatever. And it's capped. So there's 100 bands at level 1, 200 bands at level 2, and everybody else. So 300 bands are given, and if you don't get level 2, then you don't get tour funding, you don't get marketing, you don't get any other kinds of support. It's just you can submit a demo for our juried sounding, and then my demo goes to a guy who's into bluegrass that lives in Fredericton, and he goes, "This is garbage music." You know what I mean? It's like it's so backwards as to way you have all of this money, and think of the good things you can do when infrastructure of touring circuits is it's brutal out there. Outside of the core cities, it is impossible to run a sustainable music venue in Brandon and in Regina and all these places. I mean, and so as a Canadian who's interested in pursuing this Canadian ideal of a Canadian music system, those are the things that are necessary to keep this Canadian arts culture alive, is to be able to play in Prince George and Hinton. You know what I mean? And without that, and then the bands that are getting the biggest amounts of money are too big now to play in Brandon and Hinton and Prince George. So they just ignore it. So I'm a tier 3 funded artist, and I'm only going to play Toronto, Vancouver, and Montreal. Maybe the occasional festival elsewhere. To me saying all this shit and the kind of like the personal toil it's taken on my own life, including being unemployable for 5 months, because every time I'd get to, I have a PhD, I have amazing experience doing certain, like for my professional life, and then you would get to the interview and they'd love you, and then they'd Google you. And then all you could see is this stuff about me being the one of the top Google searches is Paul Lawton, the most hated man in Canadian music, from the CBC. We're not going to hire this guy, and to the point where I actually applied for a job at Factor 2 years ago when I was unemployed. I was like, well, I know so much about Factor now.
Right.
I'm going to try to fix it from the inside. And I sent them a resume, and I got a phone call from the president 3 or 4 days after. We're like, okay, just so you know, we read your resume, and there's no way we could hire you, but we wanted to tell you that because they didn't want me to go off again. And like, it's like, are you kidding? Like, you can't imagine how hypocritical that is. It's like, and the things that they have Factor has personally pulled on me in terms of, like, there was a thing I was supposed to do a debate with Duncan, the president of Factor, on CBC day 6, and I get there and he doesn't show up. He won't go in a room with me, so I get interviewed, and then they play my interview back, and he gets to respond with me not in the room.
Oh.
And that's what they run.
You know what's
It's so fucked.
You know what the thing is? And look, you and I just met.
Sure.
For the first time.
Face to face.
Face to face.
Yes.
And I think this goes a long way for, it's like they say with email, there's no tone to email.
Sure.
It's impossible. I think the problem is your writing, while it is incredibly articulate, it is also incredibly direct and blunt. And to be honest with you, speaking to you and sitting here face to face with you, it's 180 from the way that the writing comes across.
Of course.
And I wish more people would have the opportunity.
Yeah, people say that a lot.
To actually hear this
guy's
from
super
you
nice
in person.
Yeah, I mean, I got my start. I learned how to write. I had a punk zine. I mean, I grew up in that world, and it's the most direct way to express myself, because that's how I feel when I write blunt, direct. Because I can also write in a less blunt, direct way, but I tend to avoid it because it's way less efficient at delivering my message.
The problem is, I think that there's, and again, I think that there's just an unbelievable amount of wonderful people that work in the music industry.
100%.
Great people and everything, who I think really should.
For those people listening right now.
Those people, but I could easily see you actually having very civil, fun conversations with these people about things. But I think that they've built you up at this point, and going by the writing style, I think some people have turned you into, this fucking troll.
And good. Frankly, good. Like, I mean,
I don't think so. See, I disagree, because here's the thing. I'm a big believer in the Iron Fist velvet glove,
Sure.
which is at the core.
Yeah.
You've got to be solid and believe what you have.
Yeah.
But the velvet glove is, it's the nature of the people.
And don't get me wrong, because I think I could do that too, but I think that I'm not doing that for very specific reasons.
Okay.
Because, I mean, when I have now twice on basically the same arguments got national press. I'm doing an interview tomorrow afternoon with National Post.
Oh no! Look, I think,
it's this stuff to me is deadly important.
Hey,
so
no,
I'm willing to be
absolutely.
the pariah. That's fine.
No, but I think it would be amazing. Look, it's just me.
Sure. Yeah.
What you're saying and being, that deadly serious about things.
Sure.
Absolutely, by all means.
Yeah.
But I think that it would surprise a lot of people, and I think that more people would be willing to come to the table if they could actually either meet you or see you on television.
So let me tell you this: my personal hope, always from day one, and I know this is a weird thing to think about, but I thought it early on when I first started writing that blog, and it was anonymous, and I was writing about bands, and then I got outed. Someone hacked my computer. I got outed nationally. Boom. Here I am. Here's a guy who has a record label and touring bands, and I had a fairly active Twitter presence, and it's just like a guy that people, oh, that guy, what, and my hope was always that I would start the ball rolling, and that you would have other people who had a softer touch, who were able to come in and go, oh, let's take parts of this argument or let's have a conversation, because maybe
I think that has happened though.
I do, but nothing's changed.
I mean, here's the thing. I think some things definitely have changed. I think you definitely were very successful in changing the discourse that's out there.
Yeah.
I think you were very successful in putting a lot of things on the table that a lot of people had been discussing privately, but had never been willing to
that was
discuss
my other
publicly.
thing. It's like all the stuff you're calling me out for saying is stuff that all of you talk about behind closed doors. I'm sorry.
It's
making fun of bands. Any of the people who are on the inside were able to check their privileges for 2 seconds and say, you know what, this is right. We know the Canadian, the population of Canada does not owe me a living, that there should be a little bit more of, to go anyways. And then there's that other side of that comes out here where I'm a normal person who's that, and that doesn't need to come out, but it's always there. And anyway, this is a very long-winded way of saying, this does affect me, and I mean, my feelings, I get my feelings hurt all the time, because I'll be throwing bombs out, and then one person will say something. I got into a Twitter fight this weekend about it. It was that one of the bands called me, there's an outpouring of love for Mammoth Cave closing down, and I'm just just so mad because my records are getting cleared out for the first time. I sold more records in that short period of time, and things are going crazy. I'm just like, oh, this is the worst. Now, not only is my label closing down and people are picking my pockets, but the amount of work I have to do to mail those records out is just making me sick, and I'm mad about it.
Right.
And then one guy from a band Twitter account says something about how I'm a white, too bad they're not giving out factor grants for butthurt little children or something like that. And I was like, here we go. Do you know what I mean? It was I was waiting for it because there's so much tension built up.
Right.
And then you can just go. And I mean, ultimately, my only response was, I took a screenshot of their factor money they got to record a punk, $24K to record a punk record. And I was like, oh, you mean, is that what this is for? And the screenshot of that, and then it was on, because I didn't have to do anything, because there are definitely a lot of people who follow me waiting for that kind of drama
Right.
to happen and just jump on, and it got really ugly to the point where I kind of want to like apologize to them, because it was like I don't think they realized what nest they stepped in, maybe, but from their perspective, it's like they're the little guy now. They're embattled. And,
Well, look, on the outside, they didn't step into a hornet's nest. They kicked somebody who was down.
yeah, it's true. But in their mind, and in a way, he's right, and I can see his point. It was like, well, this is a guy from Slagging Off who made fun of 300 bands, Canadian bands, and I think the difference maybe is that there was a political motivation to that, which is, Canadian Music Week. We have 1,000 bands coming to Toronto, and fuck all you bands at the same time. It's like so cynical, and like the whole thing of like accepting a band from the prairies to this Canadian Music Week thing and making them pay their way to come here and paying them in wristbands, and just so that they can sell tickets on this idea that you have this a la carte super festival, and it's just totally exploitative of all these bands. And part of it's just like there's no one's telling the truth anymore. It's like, this is obviously my subjective opinion, but
There's certain things like with festivals.
yeah,
There is only one truth that
Yes.
bands need to know, and the bands don't hear it, and nobody says it to them, but it's just really as simple as, if you're playing a festival
yeah,
and you think people are going to come out and just happen to stumble upon
Yeah.
you while you're playing,
doesn't happen.
it's you're better off playing the lottery.
Yeah, absolutely. It's incredibly tough, because I was in that situation for a lot of years, being from prairies. We'd have bands, and I remember distinctly one time we went into we had a band, and we went up to Calgary, and we dropped a CDR off. It was like 2001 or 2, and we just played local shows, and I think we had like something going on, but I remember going into a club in Calgary with our CD, and we want to play it. We'll open for anybody. Like, we're just hungry for a show outside of our own town in our own garage. And the guy looked at me and said, "Not Lethbridge. Like, nothing good has ever come out of Lethbridge." And he threw it in the garbage in front of me, and I was like, "Oh, well, I guess, if they're not going to like us in Calgary, then how could anybody else like us?" So that actually kept us back for like 6 years, because it would be like, no, we'll just play in town, and it's fine. And you just like, but there was a point where if someone had said to us, "Hey, you're going to come to Toronto, big city, you're going to have a gig, and it's going to be great," at one naive point, I would have jumped at it. Oh my God.
Right.
Let's do this. We're going to Toronto. We're gonna set the world on fire, because you just have no clue. And that's what that system preys on. It's the other side to this giant, this giant maker of factor funding. And then it's the other side of, there's all these people trying to figure it out, and all these people just sucking them dry. And it's like, it's all, to me, at one spectrum of fucked upness, where you have this is like a broken system that people are being exploited on all sides, and it's not about music, and it's about business people who are able to pay their rent on this side of it or that side of it, and me saying to a band, look, no one has ever been honest with you about it, but you are doing this thing that is maybe 10 years out of date. Maybe get rid of the hand claps and the whoa-oh choruses, and you might have something. It's like, when do you ever get that feedback? And that came out of my own thing, where we used to send CDRs out to review, and early on, people would say, "No, this sucks," and I would learn from it. I was hungry for that. Oh yeah, please tell me why it sucks, because I'm dying to know what doesn't suck and how to do something that doesn't suck. And without that system on either side, you are like, you see on one side these people who seem to be doing it. I mean, I know for a fact that someone was upset with me for shutting down Mammoth Cave, and they thought of me as like another Sony or Universal, like this, that I'm this record mogul. Like, it's just like, because nobody tells the truth about it. It's all illusion. It's all optics. It's all, hey, we have this thing coming out, and we're going to hype it up and spin and all these other things. You're on Pitchfork, blah, blah, blah. It's just like, it creates this world that is it's so thin you could pop it with a needle. Me leaving Mammoth Cave instead of letting it rot and just going out with a letter and going on a dramatic fashion, that wasn't a mistake.
Oh, no.
I thought that out for weeks because I knew what would happen if I did it that way. It was the same thing as when Ian Blurton quit Come On and he sent that letter out.
Right.
It's like, I can't eat another fucking Tim Hortons. That line, like right in my brain. You know what I mean? He was so right. I've toured Canada, like when Canada touring went from eating in small diners in weird towns to Tim Hortons, Tim Hortons, Tim Hortons. It changed the whole essence of what it is to be a Canadian musician. You're just eating doubles and bagels every day, as opposed to eggs and bacon and whatever in some, in Kandahar, Saskatchewan, there's this little diner that used to be there. Now it's a Tim Hortons. That used to be the stop between Edmonton and Saskatoon. You used to go there, and now it's gone. So, yeah. Anyways, I guess maybe borderline some nostalgia, but
the to put a cap on it, you are a man who loves the country. You are a man that loves Canada.
Yeah, man. I'm a patriot. I mean, that's the thing. I am. You don't put out 44 Canadian records of different bands from across country in weird places and not love what's happening here. And I still am incredibly, in a weird way, naively still optimistic that this will go somewhere else than where it's going now, that the pendulum will eventually swing, that, we will get tired of soullessness and cowardice and thin ideas that are just bandied about as great things right now. And I realize that that's still incredibly naive and idealistic, but that part of me is still alive, and that's what drives. I think that's what drives that anger. I guess it's like could be better. So,
well, look, I'm going to ask one last question.
Sure. Yeah. Absolutely.
This was sent into us. Someone at Tough Age
Yeah.
on Twitter wants to know, why do you always schedule haircuts during band practice?
So I've been playing this band Tough Age for like a month, and one time I had to get a haircut. I'm a Toronto guy now. I'm incredibly busy. I don't have time. Like it's like I have a Saturday now and a Sunday, so I better fit in my haircuts and my band practices and my mail outs and everything else. And it's just like I got a 9-to-5 job, and
Paul,
yeah.
welcome to the big city.
Thanks so much, man.
Thank you for doing this. I really appreciate
Pleasure.
it.
This was a really good conversation.
Cool, man. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you.